Welcome to the week that was, but we mostly wish it wasn't, for the week ending January 16th, 2026. This is a weekly roundup of the highlights and lowlights of campus anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. This week I had around 35 stories to choose from. If something is happening in your neck of the woods, please be sure to let me know. I'm your host, Andrew Pessin. I am a professor. Please don't hate me. For more about me and my work, visit andrewpessin.com. For all the details of today's stories and loads more stories, follow me on X at Andrew Pessin. I begin with the announcement. I have now officially launched the Institute for the Critical Study of Anti-Zionism. This is a scholarly enterprise aiming to expose the origins, evolution, and contemporary manifestations of anti-Zionism, from the protocols of the Elders of Zion through the Nazis, the Soviets, the Muslim Arabs, the Western progressives, and more. I'm seeking interested collaborators and possible sponsors, so if that's you, please contact me to discuss. Please note the Institute has launched with a free six webinar series beginning next month. To find out more about that, please get in touch. Okay, let's get to the news. Most of the big news this week is in the legal department, so that's where we'll begin. This week, a federal appeals court has ruled with respect to Colombia that the earlier judge had no jurisdiction to free anti-Israel activist Mahmoud Khalil, thus opening the path towards his rearrest and a potential deportation. Meanwhile, with respect to the University of Florida, the 11th Circuit had an important ruling this week that anti-Semitic speech that can be read as calling for violence is not protected by the First Amendment. That sort of seems obvious, at least in the abstract. But in the particular case, the court ruled that the University of Florida cannot be forced to readmit law student Preston Damsky while a lower court weighs his lawsuit against the school. He had been expelled from the school for his pro-Palestinian activism, but more specifically for statements such as Jewish people are parasites on the West and are the common enemy of humanity, and that Jews must be abolished by any means necessary. Sounds a little threatening to my ear. Meanwhile, one hopes that this standard would also be applied to The Ohio State University, where a federal judge ruled this week that OSU likely violated the free speech rights of a student for expelling him with respect to his pro-Palestinian comments. This student, Guy Christensen, wasn't merely pro-Palestinian. He did things such as openly supporting the murder of two Israeli embassy staffers in Washington, D.C. last year, and read aloud the manifesto of the man who shot the two victims, praising it and endorsing the activity. Again, it's one thing to be pro-Palestinian, it's another thing to openly endorse murder or mass murder. This week, some law professors warned that recent federal court ruling, enables universities to evade anti-Semitism accountability. In particular, professors from NYU and the University of Michigan published a scholarly paper challenging a recent federal court decision that distinguished between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. This case was, of course, the anti-Semitism case against MIT. Basically, MIT got off the hook because the judge found that most of the activism was anti-Zionist, not anti-Semitism. This is precisely why we need an Institute for the Critical Study of Anti-Zionism to understand its true nature and its relationship to anti-Semitism. In particular, the two professors argued that the courts are fundamentally misunderstanding civil rights law by requiring proof of discriminatory motive rather than focusing on the harassment's impact on victims. Cooper Union this week settled an anti-Semitism lawsuit against them. You might remember the particular episode. It was widely covered in the news. Shortly after October 7th, a significant group of Jewish students was essentially barricaded inside the library while an angry mob bayed outside, banging on the glass, basically calling for their blood. They had to be escorted by police out the back entrance of the university. Students eventually sued, and that has now been settled. Cooper Union has committed to a number of measures, including establishing a Title VI coordinator, and providing provisions, for example, requiring, for example, the pre-approval of postings on campuses, and also new provisions regarding student safety during demonstrations, such as prohibiting the use of masks intended to conceal identities, and requiring participating students to present valid Cooper Union identification upon request. Most of those seem like no-brainers, if you ask me, but it took a long haul to get this university to acknowledge that. Okay, some other top stories of this past week. Stanford University, the trial began this week for five Stanford students who were charged with occupying and vandalizing buildings during a 2024 anti-Israel protests. Boston University will be hosting next month a quite nasty anti-Zionist Jewish left conference. Keep our eyes on that one. University of California, Santa Barbara, a Jewish frat there found a swastika in shaving cream on a bathroom mirror. In the United Kingdom, a Jewish member of parliament was barred from visiting a primary school because his presence, it was said, quote, might inflame the teachers. Note how this is a perfect case of how anti-Zionism is used as a cudgel against the Jews. Make Israel toxic, therefore Zionism is toxic, and therefore Jews are toxic, and Jews will be barred from visiting elementary schools because of Israel. In the professional organizations department this past week, the Modern Language Association passed an anti-Semitic resolution condemning Israel's genocide. Why a literature organization should be discussing the Middle East and developing a policy is a very fine question. The American Historical Association, well, the basic membership, or rather a conference vote, passed two quite unpleasant anti-Israel resolutions, but at least the Executive Council had the good sense to veto passing them on to the full membership for a full membership vote because they quite obviously violated the group's charter, which is to steer clear of foreign conflicts that have nothing to do with the mission of the American Historical Association. Students for Justice in Palestine this week, DePaul University has suspended its SJP chapter through next academic year, 2026-2027, for numerous violations of student conduct codes. And the City College of New York, their Students for Justice in Palestine chapter, remains a registered student group, campus group in good standing, despite its participation last week in a openly pro-Hamas protest in Queens that caused nearby Jewish schools and a synagogue to close early. This particular protest featured dozens of keffiyeh-clad demonstrators gathered outside the synagogue shouting, "We support Hamas here. We support Hamas here." In the K through 12 department in the United Kingdom, the National Education or Educators Union, the largest teaching union there, has opened an independent investigation into its own institutional anti-Semitism. If it is truly independent, then that is good news because this has been a true hotspot of anti-Semitism over the last few years. In France, a textbook was published by a major publisher that referred to the victims of the October 7 attacks as Jewish settlers. This caused a large uproar, in response to which the textbook has subsequently been recalled. In the perhaps Jews are our own worst enemies department at the University of Pennsylvania, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is undertaking an investigation into anti-Semitism there, requested some information about Jewish faculty and students there to basically be able to reach out to them and hear their stories and get their complaints. But groups representing Jewish faculty and students there have launched a campaign to not cooperate and not provide information to the investigation of anti-Semitism there. And finally, anti-Semitism off campus this week, probably one of the bigger stories. Well, there was some arsons of synagogues, almost becoming usual at this point, unfortunately. But in Australia, Australia's largest literary festival, an Adelaide annual festival, was canceled this week after 200 writers pulled out in solidarity with a pro-Palestinian writer who had been disinvited because she was openly Hamas supporting and, in my opinion, openly Jew hating. What was, of course, ironic about this was this writer, had successfully campaigned last year to have Thomas Friedman disinvited, allegedly for being a Zionist. In my opinion, that's a generous label to him. So somehow it was good enough for her to have someone else boycotted, but she was quite upset to be boycotted. But meanwhile, the takeaway story is 200 writers expressed solidarity with a Hamas supporting, Jew hating writer. Well, that's the news, unfortunately. Tune in next week to see what fresh horrors next week might bring. Again, I'm your host, Andrew Pessin at andrewpessin.com, hoping everyone manages to keep it together until next time. See ya.